Welcome to the VITV podcast. This is a podcast that helps you grow your wealth and become financially independent. My name is Beko and my partner Hari.
Hello.
It's good to see everybody. It's been a long time since we recorded our last podcast. It's good to be back. Um, Hari, how are you?
I'm good. Good. End of 2021. It's been a crazy year uh, so far. So this will be an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about the year in review, what happened, kind of um, big themes this year that drove the market, some considerations that people might have about the future as well. So we're going to divide this episode into two parts. Part one, we'll be talking about what happened this year, and then the second episode, we will talk about big themes that we anticipate will influence the market in a major way next year in 2022. I can't believe it's 2022, but okay. So should we get started? Disclaimer. Okay, disclaimer. All right.
Yeah, this is the Value Investor TV VITV podcast. We are not financial advisors. We don't know your specific financial situation. So please consult with the appropriate advisor before making any financial or tax decisions.
I also, okay, before we start, I feel like a brief moment of explanation is warranted here about why we've been so absent. Perhaps you could start with your situation. I could kind of chime in with mine, Howard.
Yeah, I mean, in my middle of the year, uh, in 2021, I got promoted to the CEO position of my company, which has kind of led to me taking on a lot more responsibility, and it took a bunch more time than I was expecting. So, um, you know, things have settled down now, so I'm back to more time to focus on value investing, which is what I've needed to do for a while. So I'm glad to be able to start doing this again.
Awesome. On my end, Hari got promoted to the CEO position. I started my own company, as some of you guys know already. Obviously, middle of the year, just trying to get the company off the ground takes a lot of energy and time. So that's been consuming most of my time. So that's why I've been absent from the Value Investor uh, podcast in our community. So we apologize for that. We'll try to be as involved as possible, in the context of our new roles. But thank you for being patient and excited to at least record this one last episode before we close out the year. So, all right, should we get started?
Yeah. Um,
So year in review. So 2021, big themes. Obviously, we can't talk about the market without talking about what happened this year in terms of COVID. Obviously, COVID had a lot of influence in the market in many ways. But before we talk about the influence on the market, let's actually talk about the COVID itself and the lockdowns and the vaccine rollout. Let's just kind of talk about that. And obviously, you as a physician, maybe you can provide some perspective, medical perspective also. All right.
yeah. So I think the biggest thing was the beginning of the year. We saw um, that the vaccines became available for. At first, it wasn't the entire population, but it was doled out by age and by if you were a healthcare worker, and then it kind of expanded. And by March to April in the U.S., most of the country could get um, access to the vaccines. What we saw though was that instead of thinking that that would kind of end the pandemic, um, it didn't actually change the course of the pandemic. We were still seeing transmissions, still seeing spikes in cases, you know, uh, through August, September, and so on. And so what that ended up doing was led to a lot more lockdowns and things like that. Now, but all of that depended on what state you were living in. So in 2020, many states had extended lockdowns, but in 2021, states, especially Republican-controlled states, did not have nearly as many lockdown kind of measures, and so work was more. More people were going back to work in the red states than there were in the blue states. So we kind of saw a different um, 2020 was basically lockdown everywhere. 2021 was a different kind of mentality. But regardless, the virus continued to spread, and now we're at the point in December where we're seeing a new variant called Omicron, uh, I think in many ways is a good thing because it's going to reduce the hospitalizations and probably get us back on our feet much faster.
Yeah. I mean, some people are saying that Omicron is actually kind of a blessing, not to diminish or downgrade those that are really affected by this, but it could be like a mass immunization effort
Yep.
or a mass immunization kind of event with Omicron.
Right.
Due to the fact that it's not as severe when it comes to the effects on human condition. Um, but yeah, so that's certainly. I mean, you live in Texas. I most of 2021. Yeah, I lived in California. It's to see the kind of difference was pretty stark. And I think you guys opened up pretty early. Is that right? I mean, is it's
Yeah.
been
So
kind of back to normal since when?
well, so I think the from a government standpoint, it's been open since September or so of last year. But what was different was, people's behavior has kind of been moderated by case, spikes and things like that. So when you saw case volumes were pretty low in the hospitals, you know, people were out and about. And then when they started to spike, people kind of naturally went back, and limited their outdoor active or their activities outside of the house. So, but for the most part, you go around Houston, I can't think of any places where I have to wear a mask, to go into a store, to go into a restaurant. Whereas in 2020, that was fairly commonplace. Um, and I don't see any, restaurants limiting seating by, capacity or anything like that anymore. So for the most part, if you walk around, it would look to you like, we were pre-pandemic kind of levels.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. No, I didn't go to Houston, but I was in Miami for 3 days or something like that. COVID didn't exist there. It
Yeah.
almost it felt like it didn't exist. People were just completely back to normal, and so just very different landscape when it comes to coming out of COVID. Obviously, this is talking about the context of the U.S. So apologies for those of you guys listening from overseas. But that's COVID. Let's move on to the second topic. Obviously, COVID had a lot to do with the supply chain issue that we saw and how brittle it was actually. Um, I mean, we've been seeing this in 2020, right? Starting in 2020, but in 2021, I think a lot of that kind of materialized into price, um, the inflation. But before we talk about the inflation, let's just talk quickly about the supply chain issue that we saw this year.
Yeah. So this is it's a complex thing, right? There was a lot more people at home. So they were actually buying more things for the house. So that there was a demand increase, but there was also a shortage of many of the items that people were buying. Part of that was the source of the materials, like from China and Southeast Asia. They had lockdowns that were preventing, capacity limitations. You had limitations at the ports for getting things off of off the boats and onto trucks. You had a limitation on the number of drivers who were working for delivering goods and services to or goods to stores. So it was a multifactorial thing. And then you had people along the supply chain who were not working either because of they were getting paid stimulus money to stay at home. There were quite a few people who were very hesitant about getting vaccinated, so they and their employers were pushing that, so they stayed away from the office. So it's a fairly complex cycle here that to say how it's going to get fixed is very hard for us to to kind of look at. But what that led to was a rising of prices as a result of the shortages of many things. I think the most acute place that you saw the supply chain issue was on the tech sector, right? Chip shortages were very prevalent in 2020. early 2021, it really didn't, kind of ease up. I think for a long time you couldn't get a CPU, they were, being handed out, by lottery in many places like Newegg and things like that. So those have started to ease up, but it's still seeing a shortage of like, graphics cards and things like that. It's not affecting car output anymore like it did in 2020, but it's still there. So, so supply chain is a really complex thing, and but it just goes to show you how integrated the world's economy is, and if you have any disruption along the way, it creates, downstream consequences.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this word resilience. Resilient supply chain has been kind of thrown about since the COVID started. But I think what we were seeing in 2021, we're going to talk about the price, inflation, but it's actually materially impacting, the what people pay at the store, right? It's sort of like the supply chain issue is all theoretical until it actually hits you,
Right.
and I think that's what we're seeing now. That's what we have been seeing now in 2021. Um, yeah, so we'll see how this goes. I think a lot of people are this sort of rhetoric about supply chain brittleness has been bandied about for a while. I think it's been talked about since kind of Trump presidency of how like supply chain, when it comes to when it comes to supply chain that kind of ropes many countries in Southeast Asia and China, South America, and Trump really kind of brought this rhetoric forward to make this make this stuff at home. But I think that's kind of what we're seeing now, and yeah, we'll see how we'll see how this actually pans out. In terms of people kind of changing the supply chain and how that kind of shapes up the global economy in the future. The next item that we have here is the inflation, and we can't talk about inflation. Obviously, inflation as it relates to supply chain, but we can't talk about inflation without talking about all the stimulus money that's been flooding the market. So, give us a little bit of color on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, when you have, you know, money itself follows the same economic, principles of supply and demand. And so when you put more money into the economy, and the way that the federal government does that is by producing, one, they can do the stimulus, which was essentially just creating money out of nothing, which is what they've done for, to stimulate the economy. And what that ended up doing was putting a lot of cash into people's pockets that then went into buying more goods and services, which those goods and services were already limited by, these supply chain issues that we just talked about. So that stimulus, essentially, what the only way that that can get resolved is if people raise prices. And so you're seeing gas prices go up, which is a huge, hit to the middle class and the lower middle class. Um, but just goods of every kind, foodstuffs went up. And what this ended up doing was, you also saw from the pre-pandemic, we started seeing minimum wages rise, because of states that were pushing, a minimum wage of $15 an hour, where it used to be closer to 10 or less. So all of this, what this does is it creates the price for, something goes up so much, um, that the value of your dollar actually goes down. So even though your wages may increase as a result of this, um, your actual spending ability goes down, which is, obviously creates problems for a lot of people. Um, the rich tend to have the largest increase in, their real income, or in their nominal income. But what ends up happening is, the poor see a much smaller percentage increase, but the rising inflation at now almost 6 to 7%, means that your dollar just goes, a lot less. So from 2008 till 2020, the inflation rate was around 1 to 2% or less in many years. Um, it never really crossed the 2% number. Now that
That,
it's go
That,
ahead.
I mean, that was a target for the Federal Reserve, is to hit that 2% target. And
Correct.
because we weren't hitting it, because there was just so much deflationary forces at play, because we weren't hitting it, we continue to stimulate the economy with low interest rates and not buybacks, but what do you call those? Quantitative easing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the end result of that is we had a very hot economy for a very long time. Then COVID hits, then you start doing the stimulus and you put in $2 to $3 trillion into the economy that hadn't existed before. And suddenly we have this huge inflation, which we talked about several times on the podcast in the last couple of years. But now that it's actually hitting us, we're seeing, it really hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a bit of lag, right? I mean, there's a time differential between when the money actually gets released into the market and when the actual price of goods that you buy as a consumer goes up. Not just consumer goods, but like even, I mean, I guess even more so like investment properties, like real estate or
Yep.
stock market or even Bitcoin. The reason why those things go up is because, I mean, there are a bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons why it went up is because the nominal dollar value of it, the dollar is sort of becoming worth less and less and less, and so the dollar value of it actually goes up. Um, yeah, so definitely a major trend in 2021. But the time differential is interesting here. What is going to happen? I mean, how much money was released this year? Like 5 trillion or something like that in
Yeah.
total?
Yeah. And that's not including the infrastructure plan that um, is currently being, woven through Congress right now. And it may not pass in any form that, we know about, but about 5 trillion was what we injected.
Yeah, about 5 trillion was injected. So all this kind of inflationary forces and prices starting, all this kind of excess liquidity is being materialized in prices in consumer goods and real estate and investable assets. I wonder where, how much or how long it'll continue, and what that will mean for investors and what that will mean for just as a consumer. Um, which brings us to kind of actually this is a good segue into the next topic we want to talk about, which is 2022 big trends there. um, Inflation obviously talked about just now, with 2022 approaching, interest rate hikes as a way to control inflation. Three interest rate hikes are earmarked for 2022. Let's kind of talk about that, unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that in the next episode when we're doing 2022, or do you want to cover that now?
Should we just go right through?
Um,
Or let's cut it if you want
let's
to cut
cut
it.
it here, and then we'll start again in the
Okay.
new one. So,
How,
why don't we close this one here?
yeah, okay. Where do we leave? Okay, we talked about inflation. Okay, we'll find a good spot to
Yeah,
cut.
we'll let Nick cut
Okay.
there. But yeah, let's just to close out. We'll just do the normal email us and then the like, comment,
Okay.
subscribe stuff.
Okay. All right. So that kind of brings us to the end of this episode. We talked about what happened in 2021: COVID lockdown, supply chain issue, inflation, a bunch of stimulus money going into the market and hitting the prices. And so that's it for this episode. Again, it's been kind of we had a long hiatus with the podcast. Appreciate you guys sticking around and listening to this one. And hopefully, if you guys want, hopefully you guys check out some of our previous episodes. We have a checklist that we go through to analyze a company. So if you guys want a copy of that, please email us at info@valueinvestor.org. info@valueinvestor.org. We also have a website, valueinvestor.org, that summarizes all the fundamental data of publicly listed companies. You're more than welcome to check that out. And lastly, if you want to be part of our Slack community, again, just info@valueinvestor.org. Email us there, and we will add you to our Slack channel. All right.
And then one thing I'd say that I'd really appreciated the people who listened to us and started watching us on YouTube. They helped us a lot with pushing our subscriber count up, and they did so by liking the posts, commenting, and subscribing and hitting that notification bell so that we um, as we start producing more content in 2022, we'll start showing up on more people's feeds. So we'd really appreciate it if you could do that for us. Just hit the like button and subscribe, and hit the and if you can comment, that would be a great as well.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. We'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks.